Did you know this video is designed to be a long, quiet drift through Pokemon facts, meant to be heard as players fall asleep, with nearly 2 hours of calm trivia and rumors arranged? So there are no loud surprises, no sudden music stings, and no bursts of excited commentary to pull anyone back awake once the mind starts to wander. Instead of rapid-fire hype or intense battles, this is closer to a slow audio walk through the series, where each step is another soft detail about the world, the games, and the strange little stories that grew around them. Tonight, the mood is a quiet nighttime walk through the Pokemon world, more like wandering down an empty route after midnight than standing in a crowded tournament stadium with dim lights from distant houses, the faint glow of a Pokemon Center sign, and the soft cries of wild Pokemon echoing far away over the tall grass. There are no trainers waiting to challenge players, no sudden rival encounters, only the slow rhythm of footsteps and the gentle turning of pages in an invisible Pokédex, each page holding one more piece of information that could easily be missed when playing in the daytime rush. Throughout this video, the structure stays simple and cozy, built from many small, self-contained facts and rumors, each one told like a tiny bedtime story that begins, unfolds, and ends before the next one quietly begins. One moment might describe how early concept art showed Pikachu with a rounder, chubbier body, while the next drifts into how some claimed the unknown were secretly spelling out warnings on ruined walls, or how the sound of the Pokemon Center healing jingle has barely changed for decades, turning into one of gaming's most reliable comfort sounds. Each piece stands on its own, so players never need to focus hard or remember what came before, and can safely let attention fade in and out. The tone will sometimes lean into the lightly eerie side of Pokemon, with ghost types, old rumors, and strange Pokédex entries appearing like shapes in the fog, though everything stays soft and calm rather than shocking. One common rumor is that certain ghost-type cries were dangerous to listen to for too long. Another rumor said that Lavender Town's theme could unsettle players in ways that went beyond the game itself, and some claimed certain entries about Pokemon like Drifloon or Banette were based on real hauntings. However, this was easily debunked, and here these stories are treated more like campfire tales told at half volume. Although the rumors are false, they still create an interesting, dreamlike backdrop. Before the facts truly begin, players are invited to get comfortable, to dim the lights or switch off the screen entirely, to lie down, adjust pillows or blankets, and if possible, close their eyes and simply let the steady stream of Pokemon details wash over them. There is no need to stay fully alert or to follow every connection, as the video moves from regions to legends, from biology to behind-the-scenes design, because the goal is not to test knowledge, but to create a gentle noise of nostalgia and curiosity that slowly fades into sleep. As that gentle noise of nostalgia settles in, the setting around those memories can begin to take shape, and without needing to move at all, players can drift back to Kanto, the first region, as if it were a quiet bedtime story, rather than a place of battles and rivalries. Imagine Pallet Town at night, its tiny cluster of houses resting under a deep blue sky, the windows dimmed, the music in your memory turned down to a soft hum, until it feels more like a lullaby than a game soundtrack. Just outside the town, the early routes lie empty, the tall grass swaying slowly in a wind that only exists in pixels, and the path forward is straight, simple, and kind. Did you know those first routes in Kanto were intentionally designed to be almost completely linear, with only a few small branches and secrets, so new players would not feel lost or overwhelmed? Designers wanted the first steps to feel safe, like walking down a familiar hallway at home, and so the world could open up gradually, instead of all at once. In Viridian City, the streets are almost silent, and the brightest light comes from the red roof of the Pokémon Center, glowing softly like a nightlight in a dark room. Inside, the healing machine waits, and the moment players picture placing Pokeballs on the tray, the short, gentle jingle plays in memory, a sound that has stayed almost unchanged across generations, echoing from Game Boy speakers, handhelds, and televisions as one of gaming's most comforting signals that everything is okay again. Some claimed that hearing that jingle after a difficult battle felt like being told to rest, to slow down, to breathe, and for many, it became a kind of unintentional lullaby, repeated thousands of times without ever quite wearing out its warmth. According to some, the Pokémon Center theme and that healing sound are the first things that come to mind when thinking about Kanto at all, more than caves or gyms, because those were the places where the tension quietly dissolved. Even the Pokémon themselves were drawn in ways that added to this softness. In early concept art, Pikachu was noticeably chubbier, with a round, plush body that looked closer to a pillow than a sleek electric mouse, and that roundness helped turn it into something players wanted to hold rather than just battle with. Over time, the design slimmed down, but the memory of that early, sleepy-looking Pikachu still lingers in old artwork and in the minds of players who remember yellow cartridges and chunky sprites. Farther away over the dark water near Cinnabar Island, waves roll in slow, repeating patterns, and the surf theme in Kanto can feel almost like breathing, in and out again and again, as if the whole region is resting. One common rumor is that Kanto was always a peaceful place at heart, a gentle starting point, untouched by anything truly unsettling. But although the rumors are false, there were always shadows at the edge of that calm map. Beyond the cozy houses and the soft red roofs, there were stories about a single town where the music did not soothe, where the lights felt colder, and where strange myths began to form around a tower of graves. And in a little while, the path through Kanto's night will lead there too. Before that colder music and that tower of graves, there was something much softer at the heart of Kanto, a shape and a sound that many players carried around in their pockets, without really thinking about it. And that shape was Pikachu. Did you know that in early concept art and the first Game Boy games, Pikachu was rounder and heavier, almost like a tiny yellow pillow with ears, a creature that looked like it could sit quietly on a desk or a bed and not move unless gently nudged. On that tiny green screen, the pixels turned into a soft oval body, short arms, and a face that seemed more plush than animal, and some claimed that this made Pikachu feel strangely huggable, even through the glass and plastic of the handheld. The early sprites did not have sharp edges or aggressive angles. Instead, they suggested a Pokémon that would waddle more than run, a sleepy electric mouse that might curl up beside a lantern and hum with static instead of crackling with danger. Interestingly, Pikachu was not supposed to be the main face of the series at all, and according to some early interviews, other Pokémon like Clefairy were considered better mascots for a while. However, as players spent more time in Kanto, something quiet started to happen, as the round yellow mouse kept appearing on merchandise, on guidebook covers, and in tiny corners of magazine pages, until the anime arrived and turned that slow drift into a wave. In the show, Pikachu's constant presence beside the main trainer made it feel like a traveling companion, rather than just a battle partner, and many said that this was when Pikachu stopped being just another entry in the Pokédex and became a sort of comfort character. The red cheeks, the simple smile, and the small size all reinforced the idea that this was a Pokémon that could sit on a shoulder or a pillow, close enough to hear its breathing if it had any. Pikachu's sound design added another layer of calm, because in the games, and especially in the anime, its cry stayed simple, high-pitched, and surprisingly soft. One common rumor is that players could calm down after a difficult battle just by hearing that familiar Pika, or the short game cry that chimed from the speaker, acting almost like a tiny reset button for the mind. Although the rumors are false in any technical sense, the effect felt real enough, and many players associated that sound with safety, with Pokémon centers, and with scenes where nothing bad would happen for a while. Over time, the artwork changed, and Pikachu slimmed down across generations, losing some of that original chubby outline, gaining a sleeker back and longer ears, almost as if it had been training alongside the series itself. However, this was easily debunked as any kind of in-universe diet, because the core idea always stayed the same: a friendly, approachable electric mouse, still small enough to imagine resting on a bedside table, still gentle enough in expression to feel like a quiet roommate rather than a weapon. Behind that familiar design, concept sheet showed stranger shapes and alternate versions, and some claimed that other Pokémon changed even more dramatically between those early sketches and their final forms. Another rumor said that these hidden drawings were the source of odd fan theories, strange supposed pre-evolutions, and missing forms that never appeared. And soon, in the shadow of that grave tower and its low music, those altered shapes would start to matter. So after those shifting sketches and half-finished shapes, the scene becomes quieter, and players are no longer in a tower full of ghosts, but instead in a dark bedroom with the soft blue glow of a handheld screen resting in their hands. The room almost silent, except for the faint hum of the device. Did you know many players used to scroll through the early Kanto Pokédex like a bedtime book, tapping down one entry at a time, letting the simple descriptions of each Pokémon blur together until their eyes began to close? The list starts at the beginning, with Bulbasaur, and the entry does not talk about battles first, but about the plant bulb on its back, slowly storing sunlight and nutrients like a living battery, quietly charging throughout the day. Some claimed that if players left a Bulbasaur idle in a bright field in-game, it felt like watching that bulb soak in warmth, as if the Pokémon itself would prefer to nap in a patch of light, resting in tall grass near Pallet Town, half hidden, half awake. In that image, Bulbasaur is not using powerful moves. It is simply breathing, the bulb rising and falling as it sleeps. Then the cursor moves, the little Pokédex chime plays, and Charmander appears. Its most famous detail, reduced to a calm status report about the flame at the tip of its tail, glowing as a quiet indicator that it is alive and well. According to some, reading that line at night made the tail feel less like a danger and more like a bedside candle, a tiny controlled fire that would flicker softly while Charmander curled up against a warm rock, sheltered in a cave mouth away from the wind. Players could imagine it dozing there, the flame shrinking just a little as it relaxes, never going out, but never raging, just steady. Squirtle's turn comes next, and the Pokédex talks about its shell, not as armor in a fight, but as a place to retreat, a portable hiding spot that it can slip into whenever it wants to feel safe. One common rumor is that Squirtle would secretly pull into its shell to sleep underwater, resting on a riverbed like a smooth stone. And although the rumors are false in terms of game mechanics, the idea fits the tone of those entries, suggesting a creature that prefers slow currents, shaded banks, and lazy afternoons sunning on rocks before drifting off. As players continue scrolling, the pattern becomes soothing, a habitat, a small behavior, a hint of biology, always balanced with a tiny piece of mystery, like a sentence about a Pokémon only appearing at dawn, or communicating in ways humans cannot quite understand. The Pokédex in these early numbers feels half field guide, half campfire story. And that soft tension between what is explained and what is left unsaid is what lets the mind wander, especially late at night. Another rumor said that if players pushed on through the numbers without stopping, the entries would gradually turn stranger and eerier. And in a way, this is true, because beyond the starters and the friendly shapes, ghost and psychic types wait with descriptions that sound more like whispered legends. The kind players will drift into soon, as the night deepens and the facts grow darker around the edges. So as players drift past the early entries and into those stranger numbers, the Pokédex starts to sound less like a guidebook and more like a book of campfire stories, the kind that are told in low voices while the last embers glow and the night feels just a little deeper than before. Many ghost-type entries read almost like tiny horror stories, though here they arrive without jump scares, just quiet legends that sit beside the more familiar facts. Did you know that Ghastly, in the earliest games, is described as a poisonous gas that can envelop and suffocate a target? A detail that sounds harsh on the page. Yet in motion, Ghastly is mostly a round face bobbing in a purple cloud, blinking and hovering with a kind of curious patience. In the anime, this same Pokémon pulls pranks, creates illusions, and reacts with big, exaggerated expressions. So the unsettling text is softened by a playful personality that many players ended up finding endearing, rather than frightening. Haunter's entries speak of slipping through walls and licking victims to drain life, and some claimed this made it one of the most dangerous Pokémon to imagine meeting in a dark hallway. However, its in-game cry is short and almost chirpy, and its animation is just a floating, disembodied grin and hands, bouncing in place like it is trying to get attention rather than stalk anyone. According to some, that contrast between the words and the visuals is part of why ghost types feel more like mischievous spirits than true monsters. Then there is Gengar, often said to hide in shadows and mimic them, waiting for a chance to steal warmth from those nearby. One common rumor is that Gengar is the shadow of another Pokémon, a theory that fits the eerie descriptions, though this was easily debunked by official material that never confirms such a link. In battles and the anime, Gengar laughs, pulls faces, and acts more like a troublemaking friend. So even the darker Pokédex lines start to feel like exaggerated tales told about that one prankster who goes a little too far. Across the series, many ghost-type cries are brief, high-pitched, and almost cute, and their idle animations loop in simple rhythmic motions that become familiar after hours of play, turning what could be frightening into something strangely comforting. In the same way that real-world ghost stories grow taller with every retelling, these entries seem to collect dramatic details. But in practice, ghost types usually help trainers, guide lost souls, or just float around creating atmosphere. Another rumor said that the game's ghost myths were based on real hauntings. And although the rumors are false, they capture something true about how players project fears and hopes onto quiet digital spaces. All of this gentle eeriness eventually gathers around one location in particular, a place whose music and story inspired one of the most unsettling Pokémon legends of all. And soon the path through these sleepy facts will lead straight into Lavender Town's waiting silence. From that quiet buildup of unease, the path finally opens into Lavender Town itself, a place many players first reached late at night, staring at a dim Game Boy screen while the rest of the house was already asleep. On the surface, it is just a small, purple-tinted town, wrapped in a soft haze, with a few houses, a Pokémon Center, and that single lonely tower rising above everything else like a watchful silhouette. The music that greets players there feels different from the bright roots and cheerful cities. A thin, drifting melody that seems to echo in the empty streets, more melancholic than frightening when the volume is low and the room is quiet. Did you know? Many players remember that first step into Lavender Town less as a jump scare and more as a strange, heavy stillness, as if the game itself had taken a deep breath and decided to speak more softly for a while. The tower full of memorials, the NPCs who talk about loss, and the washed-out colors all work together with the theme. So it is easy to understand how rumors began to gather there. See, one common rumor is that the original Japanese version of the Lavender Town music contained hidden tones that caused headaches, nightmares, or worse in children, and some claimed that early copies of the game had to be recalled or edited in secret. According to some, the proof was hidden in supposed news clippings, distorted screenshots, or fan-translated reports from magazines that no one could quite locate anymore. Another rumor said that only certain cartridges, or only players wearing headphones, would hear the dangerous version of the track, turning a simple piece of game music into something that sounded like a forbidden recording. However, this was easily debunked once fans began comparing ROMs, official soundtrack releases, and later virtual console versions, finding that the melody and structure were consistent and that there was no documented wave of real-world incidents tied to the song. Although the rumors are false, the story still lingers because it feels like the kind of tale that could have slipped through the cracks of early internet culture. The actual Lavender Town theme stands out for calmer reasons. It is written in a minor key, with an unusual, almost spiraling melody that climbs and falls in small, uneasy steps, while a simple, repetitive backing line keeps tapping underneath like a slow heartbeat. In a soundtrack where many Kanto areas are bright marches or bouncy loops, this track feels thin and fragile, so players notice it immediately. That contrast made it easy to mythologize, and the more people talked about secret frequencies or hidden messages, the more others listened closely and convinced themselves they heard something supernatural. In reality, the official game and all released versions of the music are safe to listen to, and the most lasting effect they cause is a little shiver of nostalgia when players return to Kanto years later. This rumor likely stems from a mix of creepypasta writers, fan fiction, and edited images that blurred the line between horror story and supposed history, especially at a time when fact-checking across languages was slow. As a quiet pattern interrupt in the mostly upbeat Pokemon world, Lavender Town shows how a single track and a lonely tower can inspire entire waves of myths, and it becomes a template for many other legends that followed. From here, the path through the series will keep drifting into more rumors and soft hoaxes, some eerie, some playful, as the calm journey continues deeper into the Pokemon world's imagined shadows. After the quiet unease of Lavender Town, the myths do not disappear. They just soften into something cozier, turning into the kinds of schoolyard whispers that many players remember from long bus rides and crowded playgrounds. Did you know that for a whole generation of children, the most trusted source of Pokemon information was not a guidebook or a website, but the kid who claimed an older cousin in another city had already beaten everything and found all the secrets? On cracked blacktop or in the back seats of cars, rumors moved faster than any official announcement, and every strange corner of Kanto became a possible doorway to something hidden. One common rumor is that certain tiles, empty patches of land, or suspiciously placed NPCs were there to mark secret content. So players would press against walls, tap A on every square, and trade stories about which spot had finally worked. Another rumor said that saving in front of a gym statue and resetting a certain number of times could cause a different Pokemon to appear inside, as though the game were quietly listening to repetition. The most famous of these early legends gathered around a single object, the truck near the SS Anne in Vermilion City. According to some, if players prevented the ship from leaving by never helping the captain, then returned later with strength, that lonely truck beside the harbor would hide Mew underneath. Some claimed that using strength to push the truck would make Mew pop out. Others said that cutting specific trees in a certain order, or using surf, and then strength in quick succession, could trigger a secret battle. There were even versions that involved item tricks, like placing a specific number of rare candies in the bag, or holding a fossil while checking the truck. However, this was easily debunked once players began to examine the game's data and map layouts more closely, revealing that the truck was just an unused decoration and there was no event tied to it at all. Although the rumors are false, the image of that unreachable object, placed just off the main path, felt so intentional that many players still remember the gentle excitement of trying one more method, convinced that something in the code had to respond. These stories spread so easily because information traveled slowly in the pre-internet and early internet era. When official guides were expensive, early websites were incomplete, and many households had no reliable way to check anything. Every odd tile, every unused house, and every blocked-off patch of grass could be meaningful, and without instant fact-checking, a rumor could live for months based on one playground retelling. In that quiet uncertainty, imagination filled the gaps, turning ordinary map geometry into possible gateways. Developers did eventually hide Mew in more official ways, through events, distributions, and later games that acknowledged players' fascination with secret Pokémon, so the fantasy was not entirely misplaced, just redirected. And Kanto was only the beginning. Johto's forests, Hoenn's seas, and later regions would all collect their own whispered stories and soft hoaxes, which the journey will drift into soon, as the myths grow a little wider, but keep the same sleepy, secretive tone. As the journey drifts away from Kanto's hidden gardens and unreachable ledges, it moves into a different kind of secret, one that did not live behind a fence or a tree, but inside the game's own memory, where strange shapes could appear if players stepped just outside the path the developers expected. Among these, one presence became almost mythical, a blocky, flickering visitor known as Missing No, a sort of digital ghost that many first met late at night on the shores of Cinnabar Island. Did you know that for many players, the first encounter with Missing No felt less like a normal wild battle and more like a haunting? The screen would shift to the familiar battle view, but instead of a tidy sprite, there was a tall, scrambled column of pixels, as if the game had tried to draw a Pokémon and accidentally painted over itself. The name bar would show that strange label, Missing No. Not quite a name and not quite an error message. And the cry would sound warped or oddly chosen, giving the impression that something had slipped through a crack in the code. Some claimed that finding it required a secret ritual, but in reality, it usually came from surfing along the edge of Cinnabar's coast. After talking to the old man in Viridian who taught players how to catch Pokémon, the encounter felt magical and dangerous at the same time, especially when players discovered that defeating or catching Missing No could cause the sixth item in the bag to suddenly jump to 128 copies. Rare candies, master balls, and other valuable items would multiply, as if this broken creature had the power to bend the rules of the game in the player's favor. Behind the scenes, though, the story was quieter and more mechanical. According to some explanations from fans, Missing No appears because the game is asked to show a Pokémon in a place where it has not been told what should live there. So it reaches into leftover data and reads it as if it were a creature. In simple terms, the game takes numbers that were meant to describe something else, such as the old man's name or map data, and treats them like a Pokemon's identity, so a pile of stray information becomes a tall, corrupted sprite on the screen. Rumors about missing Numert spread quickly, and one common rumor is that encountering it would always corrupt the entire save file, erasing months of progress in an instant. However, this was easily debunked by many players who met missing Numert, duplicated items, and continued their adventures without losing their teams. Though some did see their Hall of Fame records turn into unreadable symbols, or their graphics briefly distort. Although the rumors are false in their most extreme form, the glitch still felt like a forbidden door, something that could grant power, but might ask for a strange price. In time, missing Numert became less of a threat and more of a bedtime story for the series, a reminder that even structured games have soft edges, where things blur and misbehave. Every region and generation would go on to have its own gentle cracks in the code, from odd encounter tables to unusual breeding results. And another rumor said that later glitches could even hide secret Pokemon or unlock lost areas. Most of those claims would turn out to be false, but some would grow into elaborate legends on their own. And the next part of this journey will drift into those newer tales, where the myths move beyond Kanto's shores and become stranger still. From those stranger tales drifting away from Kanto, players eventually stepped off the edge of the familiar map and into Johto. And did you know that shift was designed to feel like taking a slower breath after holding it for too long? The colors softened, the melodies calmed down, and instead of feeling like an urban legend playground full of glitches and secrets, the world began to feel like an old storybook that had been waiting on a shelf for years. Right from New Barktown, the difference is gentle but clear, with wooden houses, sloped roofs, and trees pressed close to the water. That's giving the sense that this place grew naturally instead of being built on a grid. According to some design interviews, Johto drew heavily from Japan's Kansai region, so when players wander through Ecruteak City's pagodas or pass by Burn Tower's curved roof lines, they are walking through echoes of traditional architecture, shrines, and temple grounds, the kind of places where myths are said to linger in the air even during the day. The music follows that idea, using more flutes, chimes, and soft percussion, so that even a simple route theme almost sounds like background music in a small countryside town. At night, the same tracks slow down emotionally, not in tempo, but in mood, and the screen's cooler palette makes the grass, water, and dirt paths feel like they are being gently washed by moonlight. One common rumor is that staying in New Barktown's overworld theme at night for long enough would secretly change encounter data or trigger a rare event. But however, this was easily debunked once players dug into the game's code and realized the calm was intentional and not hiding anything. What truly sets Johto apart is the day-night cycle, which feels quiet now, but was a major shift at the time, because for the first time the clock in the real world followed players into the game. Different Pokemon would appear depending on the hour. Street lamps glowed in cities, and the same route could feel like two separate places, one bright and busy, one hushed and drowsy. Some claimed that playing only at night increased the odds of mysterious encounters, especially around the Ilex Forest Shrine or the ruins filled with unknown. And although the rumors are false, that connection between time, place, and legend helped the region feel alive. Certain Johto locations became cozy touchstones, like the shoreline near Olivine City's lighthouse, where the surf sound and the slow rotation of the beam make it feel like a safe harbor rather than a challenge. Ecruteak's Bell Tower and Burn Tower pair, That softness with a sense of age, suggesting that important stories happened long before any save file began, and that players are only seeing the last chapter. Another rumor said that because Johto and Kanto are linked on the same map, hidden data about ancient Pokémon or cut areas must be buried between them, and this rumor likely stems from how strongly Johto leans into legends, history, and quiet connections. Those ideas would help create some of the series' longest-lasting myths, and the next stretch of this journey will start peeling back those layers as the calm old towers and shrines begin to hide stranger tales than anything found in Kanto's code. In Johto, those quiet connections eventually lead players upward, toward stories that feel older than the games themselves, where the legends are less about strength and more about watching over the world from a distance. Did you know that Ho-Oh and Lugia are often described less like weapons and more like caretakers, ancient guardians that only appear when the balance around them is disturbed, then vanish again into cloud and sea foam once things feel calm? High above Ecruteak City, the bell tower rises like a wooden lighthouse, its floors creaking, its bells silent, and its air filled with dust and wind instead of crowds or battles. According to some in-game monks, Ho-Oh once perched there, blessing a shining city below, and players are left to imagine the glow of its feathers reflecting in the tower's polished floors, long before any modern trainer set foot on the stairs. The tower does not shout its history. It just lets the breeze slip through open windows, as if the building itself is quietly repeating a story it has told for centuries. Not far away, the burned tower offers a softer kind of eeriness, with collapsed beams, broken floors, and a sky that peers through the ruins, where a roof used to be, as if the night is still listening for the echo of a fire that ended long ago. Some claimed that if players stood still there for long enough, they could hear distant cries from the night the tower burned, though this is never confirmed and stays a gentle rumor, more bedtime ghost story than horror. In the official lore, Ho-Oh once watched as 3 unnamed Pokémon perished in that fire, and moved by sorrow, resurrected them as Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, turning loss into a quiet cycle of renewal. Instead of focusing on the violence of the flames, the games and Pokédex entries frame this as a moment where nature resets itself, assigning each beast a role tied to lightning, volcanoes, and the northern wind, so that even tragedy becomes part of a larger pattern. One common rumor is that the 3 original Pokémon were a Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon, transformed into the beasts, and while this has never been confirmed, players still repeat it as a soft, almost comforting explanation for why those shapes feel both familiar and strange. Although the rumors are false in a strict sense, the idea fits the tone of Johto, where even incorrect stories feel like they belong. Out over the ocean, Lugia waits beneath the Whirl Islands, treated not as a prize to be claimed, but as something the world itself is trying to protect, with storms and currents, as if the sea is shielding a sleeping guardian. In the anime, Ho-Oh gained a different kind of presence, appearing in the very first episode as a mysterious, golden bird soaring across a rainbow sky, long before it had a name or a Pokédex number. Many viewers at the time said it had to be a Poke God, or a future secret Pokémon, and this rumor likely stems from how the scene refused to explain itself, lingering in memory as a question instead of an answer. That gentle, half-told feeling runs through Johto's legends, where towers, shrines, and distant silhouettes invite players to fill in the gaps with their own quiet theories. The games rarely spell everything out, and many of the world's oldest tales hide in Pokédex entries, background murals, or a single line from an NPC that most players rush past. In the next sections, the journey will keep following those faint threads, moving from Johto's open skies and old wood to other regions where myths sink even deeper underground, and the rumors start to blur into archaeology, forgotten experiments, and secret Pokémon that only exist in whispers. From those faint threads and murals and throwaway dialogue, the trail eventually leads players somewhere much quieter, or into places where the story is not spoken at all, but carved into stone and left to float in the air. In Johto, that feeling settles in as soon as players step toward the ruins of Alph, where the game's usual rhythm fades and the world starts to speak in shapes instead of words. Did you know the Unown are essentially living letters? Each one a strange blinking symbol, shaped like a character of the alphabet, drifting in slow circles through empty chambers and narrow caves. Their eyes follow a steady pattern, and their cries are soft and clipped, as if every sound has been reduced to punctuation. The game never loudly explains them. It only shows that these symbols are Pokémon, and then quietly asks players to decide what that might mean. Walking into the ruins of Alph, the soundscape changes first. The music thins out into a slow, echoing track, with long pauses that make the little stone room feel much larger than it is, and every footstep lands with a hollow tap, as if the floor is remembering someone else who walked there long ago. Faded wall panels show Unown clustered into lines, and the camera lingers just long enough that players start to realize those clusters are not random. They are spelling something, even if the message is not yet clear. One common rumor is that the Unown inscriptions hide impossible secrets, or hints for legendary events, but in reality, most of the messages are simple phrases, like a child's handwriting left on a cave wall. Some claimed these phrases would change if players caught specific Unown forms or arranged them in a certain order in the party. However, this was easily debunked once fans compared screenshots and found the same short sentences in every game. The real puzzle is quieter. Just learning to read a new alphabet and feeling that small reward when the symbols finally resolve into familiar words. According to some, the way Unown reappear in different games and media means they must be tied to powerful psychic forces, or even to Arceus itself, especially after the Sinjoh Ruins event showed Unown circling overhead, like living runes during the creation of a legendary Pokémon. Another rumor said that the Unown are messengers from another dimension, shaping reality by rearranging themselves into different words, though this remains more of a comforting fan theory than a confirmed truth. Unown sit in that rare space where Pokémon leaves a mystery intentionally half-finished, offering just enough evidence to invite long, slow speculation when the screen has gone dark, and players are already drifting towards sleep. The next myths will move deeper into that feeling, away from quiet alphabets and into places where the ruins are less patient, the experiments less harmless, and the stories say that some Pokémon were never meant to be found at all. From those cold, half-finished ruins, players eventually drift into a region that feels warmer the moment the map fades in, as if the screen itself has shifted a few degrees. Hoenn is presented as a place of humid nights and long horizons, with towns pressed right up against the shoreline and routes that are more water than land, so that even late in the game, exploration feels less like marching forward and more like floating along something slow and predictable. Did you know Hoenn was intentionally designed as a nature-heavy contrast to the earlier regions, with forests, volcanoes, and oceans, taking up far more of the map than cities or industrial areas? In Kanto and Johto, nighttime often meant streetlights, empty gyms, and quiet buildings. But in Hoenn, The dark simply settles over beaches, cliffs, and long routes, where the only artificial glow comes from a distant harbor or a lighthouse effect on the water. Players moving through it at night are surrounded by waves, distant cries of winggull, and the soft flicker of reflections on the sea surface. Slateport City's shoreline shows this clearly, because at night the beach is almost unchanged, just dimmer, with the same parasols and sandcastles, but the music softens into something that feels like a slowed heartbeat. According to some, the Slateport theme became tied in memory to late childhood summers, when a handheld screen was the brightest thing in the room, and the sound of that gentle melody was enough to suggest warm air and salt on the wind. Even for players who had never been near an ocean, the game does not say much here. It simply lets the environment breathe. Farther out, Dewford Island reduces things even more, shrinking the world down to a dock, a cave, and the sound of unseen water surrounding everything, so that walking from the Pokémon Center to Granite Cave at night can feel like crossing a tiny, isolated world. Some claimed that if players waited long enough on the pier, special Pokémon would appear in the surf, or distant lights would flash on the horizon, but this was never supported by the code. And however, this was easily debunked. The image of watching a dark ocean for signs of something unknown fit Hoenn's quiet mood so well that the rumor persisted anyway. Then the pattern breaks a little, because the sea itself becomes a route. Long stretches, like Route 132, turn the entire screen into rolling water, currents, and small rocky platforms. And crossing them at night is just a loop of steady surf sounds and the soft splash of surf, with the background music carrying a slow, rocking rhythm that almost mimics breathing. One common rumor is that staying on these currents without landing for a certain number of loops would trigger a hidden encounter, as if the ocean were a gate to something secret. Although the rumors are false, and the only thing players really find is a kind of accidental calm. Hoenn's soundtrack supports all of this, using flutes, gentle percussion, and melodic lines that many associate with warm nights and long school vacations, almost like a musical version of the region's humidity. Yet beneath that calm surface, the story hints at ancient forces, with myths of Kyogre sleeping in the deep and Groudon beneath the land, suggesting that the same ocean that feels like a cradle at night could, in another story, become something much less peaceful, a contrast that the next legends would explore more directly, without fully breaking the sleepy tone. From that hint of something vast beneath the waves, players are led into Hoenn's oldest bedtime story, the one about the ocean and the earth themselves taking the shape of Pokémon. In this legend, Kyogre is not just a creature, but the sea made alive, while Groudon is the land given a heartbeat, and their movements are said to have carved Hoenn's coasts, cliffs, and inland valleys. A slow-motion battle that feels more like geology than war. In the games, old sailors, researchers, and stone tablets quietly repeat this, so it feels less like a jump scare and more like hearing an ancient myth in a museum at closing time. Did you know some in-universe storytellers even say that each heavy rainfall in Hoenn is a distant echo of Kyogre turning in its sleep, while dry heat waves are Groudon's breath rising from deep underground? According to some elders in the region, the jagged edges of places like Route 128, or the cracked sun-baked earth near the volcano, are the scars of their clashes. But the camera never rushes, and the music stays measured and looping. Players just walk, surf, or ride a bike through landscapes that feel calm now, with only the dialogue and those faint myths suggesting anything more dramatic ever happened there. High above both of them, Rayquaza waits, a long green shape hidden in the upper sky, turning the whole story into a triangle of sea, land, and air. Some claimed that Rayquaza is constantly circling the planet, watching for any sign that Kyogre and Groudon might wake again, a guardian that only descends when the balance tips too far. When players finally reach Sky Pillar, the way there is quiet and almost ritualistic, with crumbling floors, slow steps, and a theme that feels like wind moving through stone. So Rayquaza's appearance comes across less as a jump in difficulty and more as a calm, inevitable answer. To reach the places tied to these Pokémon, players slip into sealed chambers, underwater caves, and ancient ruins that are strangely silent compared to the cities outside. The Seafloor Cavern, the Cave of Origin, and those stone-marked rooms in the desert all ask for patience, puzzles, and reading, with echoing soundtracks and almost no NPC chatter. One common rumor is that staying still in these rooms long enough would cause extra inscriptions to appear, or secret events to trigger, though this was easily debunked by data miners and guidebooks. Even when the plot talks about heavy rain, harsh sunlight, or the sky itself changing color, the games keep everything controlled, like a ceremony that players are safely walking through. Cutscenes show the danger, but then hand control back gently, letting players fix things step by step instead of being overwhelmed. It becomes another example of how Pokémon mixes world-shaping legends with a small personal journey. So as players fall asleep, they can imagine not just catching these titans, but quietly restoring balance before the story drifts toward other, stranger myths that fans invented on their own. From those world-shaping titans, the story sinks even deeper underground, into places that feel less like battlefields and more like forgotten tombs, where the game quietly asks players to slow down and listen. In Hoenn's Regiruins, the air seems heavier, the palette turns muted, and every step on the stone floor echoes back at players like a soft metronome, setting a sleepy rhythm as the torchlight flickers against rough walls. The rooms themselves are almost empty, but that emptiness is what makes them feel so dense with meaning, with flat stone panels covered in strange dots that most players had never seen before. Did you know those dots are real, Braille, copied from an actual tactile writing system, arranged into long, silent sentences that the game never translates on its own? The designers turned the walls into a kind of secret textbook, so instead of a flashy cutscene, players stand in a dim chamber, staring at patterns and wondering what the game is trying to say. Because the text is unreadable at first glance, many players said that this was one of the only times a Pokémon game pushed them out into the real world, just to understand what was happening. Some claimed that the only way to solve the puzzles was to borrow a Braille chart from a library or print out reference sheets from early fan sites, tracing the dots line by line until the hidden instructions emerged. The result is that the fantasy world and real-world research blur together, turning a Game Boy screen into a quiet bridge between languages. Following those instructions never feels quick. It feels like a ritual. One panel tells players to bring a Relicanth and a Wailord in a very specific order. Another has players use certain moves or wait in place, and suddenly the act of awakening Regirock, Regis, and Registeel becomes a slow ceremony performed step by step. According to some, the best way to do it was late at night, in a dark room, letting the low music and the sound of the cursor clicking through menus become part of the experience, as if the Pokémon would only truly wake if players treated the process with enough patience. Later, when Regigigas was introduced in Sinnoh, it felt like an answer to a question that had been quietly humming under those ruins the whole time. The lore that this new giant, had once moved continents, and that the three Regis were like keys or guardians for its sealed chamber, made the earlier rituals feel retroactively connected, as if players had been participating in a much older story than the games first revealed. One common rumor is that if players arranged the trio in a special pattern in their party, Regigigas would gain secret forms or extra dialogue. Although the rumors are false, the idea fits the mood of an ancient power still half asleep beneath the surface. Another rumor said that other regions were hiding their own versions of these quiet chambers, whereas with walls that might speak in unknown letters or strange symbols instead of Braille, and that somewhere, behind an unmarked door or unreachable cave, an extra Regi or an unnamed Pokemon was still waiting to be awakened. This rumor likely stems from how often later games tucked small puzzles into side areas, sometimes rewarding players with rare items or mythical encounters, other times offering nothing more than a cryptic message and a lingering feeling that something had been missed. As the story moves on, those dim ruins and dotted walls become a template for even stranger myths, where players start to wonder what else might be sleeping just out of sight, in places the official guides barely mention at all. Those dim ruins and dotted walls in earlier regions feel like a quiet prologue once players arrive in Sinnoh. It's a place where the myths are not just hidden in corners, but carved into the mountains themselves. Sinnoh is colder, more remote, with long stretches of snow and stone, where the air feels thin and the sky seems closer, as if the stars have stepped down a little just to watch. On clear nights in this region, the constellations look sharper above the jagged peaks, and the world below feels small, almost fragile, against that silent ceiling of light. Did you know it? In Sinnoh's lore, those distant stars are not just decoration, but quiet reminders of a creation story that reaches beyond any one town or route. According to some in-game texts, Arceus shaped the very fabric of existence from a place outside normal understanding, and from Arceus came Dialga and Palkia, guardians and shapers of time and space themselves. Some claimed that if players paid attention to the way these legends are told, they could sense a pattern, as if the entire region is arranged like a slow, careful ritual around those three beings. Even if that pattern is never fully explained, it lingers in the background, a calm suggestion that every lake, temple, and stone tower is part of something ancient. At the highest point of Mount Coronet, above the drifting snow and the echoing caves, Sinnoh gathers all of those ideas into a single place. Spear Pillar. The ruined platforms and broken columns sit under a wide open sky, and the music drops into something almost empty, like the world is holding its breath. When time and space are disturbed here, the distortion world opens, and that space feels even more like a dream. Gravity bends, paths twist, and reflections of familiar places float in impossible directions, as if players have stepped into a half-remembered memory of the Pokemon world rather than the world itself. One common rumor is that certain shapes in the Distortion World's platforms secretly match Sinnoh's map, but this was easily debunked by fans who compared every angle and found only coincidences. Far away from those impossible spaces, Kanalav Library offers a different kind of quiet. Inside, the game slows down, inviting players to walk between shelves and open short, simple books that talk about the first Pokemon, the first humans, and old stories where both live together without clear borders. The text is gentle and vague, almost like a bedtime story. And although the rumors are false that reading them all in a certain order would unlock a hidden scene, the real reward is the atmosphere itself. The feeling that the game is whispering its oldest secrets in a soft voice. Because Sinnoh spends so much time on cosmic forces and ancient stories, it becomes one of the calmest regions to think about while drifting off, its ideas stretching far beyond the screen and into that same dark sky above players' beds. From that dark sky, the myths in Sinnoh eventually point toward one quiet figure, a shape that looks less like a monster and more like a symbol drifting in empty space. Arceus is described as a white, almost statue-like Pokémon, its body framed by a golden ring that hangs around its middle, and when players finally see official art, it feels calm and distant rather than angry or terrifying, as if it is already far beyond the world it created. Did you know that in the Kanalav library, the oldest stories treat Arceus less like a character and more like a force? A presence that appeared in a void where nothing else existed, then slowly brought form to that emptiness? According to some in-game myths, Arceus shaped the first landmasses, then created Dialga to govern time, Palkia to stretch out space, and Giratina to occupy a distorted, mirror-like world, setting all three in motion like pieces on an invisible clock. The text never raises its voice. It simply says that from an egg in nothingness, this Pokémon emerged, and everything players know began to unfold around it. What many found interesting is how rarely the main games allow Arceus to stand in the center of the screen. Instead, its presence is scattered in hints, as if the world is still remembering. You have the stone plates hidden across Sinnoh, each one engraved with a short, almost prayer-like line that reacts when Arceus holds it. And you have ruins where Unown and strange symbols cluster around murals that only suggest a ringed figure. One common rumor is that arranging the plates in a certain order would unlock a hidden cutscene or secret form, though this was easily debunked once players dug through the game's data and found no such event. Later, Legends. Arceus takes that distant idea and gently moves players closer, not by turning Arceus into a constant companion, but by placing the story in an older, quieter Sinnoh called Hisui. Instead of reading about history from a library shelf, players walk through it, seeing early Pokeballs, rough wooden settlements, and people who still treat Pokémon with fear and caution, while a mysterious phone-like device bearing Arceus's symbol gives out missions in a strangely modern voice. Some claimed that this device meant Arceus was secretly human or connected to the real world. Another rumor said that the game's ending would reveal the player as Arceus itself, although the rumors are false and the game keeps its creator figure just out of reach. Even with a Pokémon labeled as the original one, the series leaves wide gaps where nothing is fully explained, from how Arceus's egg appeared in the first place, to why its plates mention concepts that never show up anywhere else. Those unanswered pieces give fans room to spin quiet theories about parallel universes, cycles of creation, or other beings that might stand beside it. And the games seem comfortable letting those ideas float unconfirmed, like stars that are visible but unnamed. As the myths grow across generations, the world never feels fully mapped, which means that somewhere beyond the edges of every region, the ringed silhouette of Arceus can still drift unseen, leaving just enough mystery for the next story to begin. And while those distant creation myths feel vast and untouchable, the games also tuck their quieter stories into places that feel much closer, like rooms that players could almost step into and explore at their own pace. Did you know some of the most memorable ghost stories in Pokémon are told not through dialogue or cutscenes, but through dust, silence, and half-forgotten buildings that wait patiently in the dark corners of each region? In Sinnoh, The old chateau sits deep in Eterna Forest, a square, unmoving shape among the trees, with windows that never quite seem to reflect the light correctly. Inside, the corridors are lined with faded carpet and cracked walls. The chandeliers hang motionless, and the air feels as if no one has breathed there in decades, even though players can still hear the faint echo of their own footsteps. The dining room is set for a meal that never came. Chairs perfectly in place, plates untouched, and a single small dessert tucked away upstairs as the old gâteau, resting on a table in a quiet bedroom, like the last trace that someone once lived there. Sometimes the only movement comes from flickering lights at the end of a hallway, or a television that turns on without being touched, casting a pale glow across empty furniture. According to some, the portraits on the walls seem to track the player's movement, their painted eyes following every step, though this is just a combination of simple sprite work and imagination. Yet the game leans into that feeling by letting a ghostly butler or a small girl appear for a moment in a doorway, then vanish if players look away, never explained, never acknowledged by any NPC in town. Out on the sea in Hoenn, the abandoned ship offers a different version of the same quiet. The metal corridors creak. The cabins are neat but deserted, and the dining area has long tables set under broken lights with cutlery scattered as if everyone left in a hurry. Water seeps into some rooms, and the only company might be a stray shuppet, a wild Pokemon encounter that feels like a memory given form. One common rumor is that a lost passenger or captain could be found if players visited at a certain in-game time. But however, this was easily debunked. The idea stayed because the ship already feels like a story paused mid-sentence. These places rarely spell out what happened. Instead, item placement and environmental details suggest a timeline. Keys dropped in hallways, notes half hidden in trash cans, rare Pokemon that only appear in one room as if tied to that space. Some claimed that these ghosts connected to larger myths or legendary Pokemon, and although the rumors are false, the theories show how many players enjoy filling in the blanks left between each cracked tile and empty bed. Together, these chateaus, ships, and silent houses show how Pokemon can be gently eerie without becoming overwhelming, like campfire tales told in a whisper rather than a shout. They invite slow, late-night thinking, letting players wander, who would look twice at a painting and wonder whether something just moved at the edge of the screen before the story quietly shifts again toward another kind of hidden mystery waiting in the daylight. After those dim corridors and half-lit rooms, the camera in your mind can quietly step outside, as if the sun is just beginning to rise over a calm route. And instead of rumors or glitches, players are simply watching Pokemon go about their daily lives. It almost feels like a nature documentary set in the regions you know, except the narrator is whispering, and every movement is slowed down just enough to feel drowsy. Did you know that some of the most famous Pokemon are defined almost entirely by their habits, as if their whole existence is one long, looping routine? Snorlax is the easiest example to picture, a huge shape that just lies down wherever it wants, blocking bridges and paths not out of malice, but because it naps so deeply that traffic, music, and even battles barely matter. In the background of that image, players could imagine Pidgey and Rattata adjusting their own routes around it, like wild animals learning that a boulder suddenly appeared and then never moved again. Out at sea, the tone changes, and Lapras becomes the focus, sliding through glassy water while the sky turns orange. Early Pokédex entries described Lapras as nearly extinct, a lonely singer crossing empty oceans. But later generations quietly updated that story, saying that their numbers have recovered thanks to people protecting them. That tiny shift on a text screen adds a hopeful note, suggesting that in this world, careful choices can bring a species back from the brink, and that every evening, more Lapras are ferrying families and trainers across calm waves instead of vanishing. On land, other Pokémon live in groups that feel almost domestic. According to some entries, Kangaskhan spends nearly every waking moment caring for the baby in its pouch, teaching it to walk, to punch, and eventually to fight, turning battles into a kind of family training session, rather than pure violence. Many rock and ground-type Pokémon are described as moving in herds or packs, with Geodude and Graveler rolling together down mountainsides, and some claim that if players waited long enough on certain routes, they could see an entire migration pass by, like a hidden cutscene, though this is false in the actual games. One common rumor is that ghost types are always solitary, but Pokédex descriptions of Pokémon like Drifloon and Misdreavus often hint at them gathering in small groups, playing tricks, and then vanishing at dawn, more like mischievous birds than horror monsters. This rumor likely stems from their eerie designs and nighttime encounters. However, this was easily debunked just by reading how often they are shown clustering in graveyards or ruins. If players let their thoughts drift, it can be calming to imagine an entire day in this world, starting with flocks of Starly waking in the trees, moving through herds of Mareep, grazing in static-filled fields, and ending with Noctowl taking silent flight as lights go out in distant towns. As a mental exercise before sleep, following those rhythms, waking, feeding, playing, to resting, turns the Pokédex into a slow, breathing landscape. And as the documentary in your head keeps rolling, the focus can gently shift again. This time back toward the strange stories players tell about what lies just beyond that peaceful surface. From that quiet, breathing landscape of daily routines, the Pokédex also holds slower, heavier stories, where the world almost lost certain Pokémon and then gently pulled them back from the edge. Did you know that in the earliest games, Lapras was described as being nearly hunted to extinction, a gentle creature that would ferry people across the sea, yet was seen so rarely that players were told it was almost gone? The entry quietly blamed overhunting, a word that feels unusually direct in a series better known for friendship and battles. As players moved through later generations, those same entries began to change, and the shift is easy to miss if the text scrolls by as quickly as battle messages. According to some translations, Lapras started to be described as protected, watched over in reserves, its numbers slowly increasing as people learned to travel without taking its life. The idea that a single line in a menu could track an endangered species recovery gives the series an oddly documentary feel, as if the games themselves are following a long, careful conservation story in the background, while players focus on gyms and leagues. In that sense, Lapras becomes a case study for how the world reacts when it realizes a mistake has been made, and there is still time to fix it. Some claimed that catching Lapras in those later games felt different once they had read those entries, as if they were temporarily stepping into the role of a researcher or caretaker rather than a collector. The rumor of its near extinction is not a rumor at all, yet it is presented with the same quiet tone the Pokédex uses for height, weight, and cries, which makes it feel even more eerie and calm. Other rare Pokémon echo this feeling in softer ways. Dratini, hiding in the depths of the Safari Zone lake or in remote Johto waters, was said to be almost mythical, a creature players might only see once if luck and patience aligned. One common rumor is that the long wait while fishing for Dratini was intentional, a small test of whether players would sit still for a fragile species. Fossil Pokémon, revived from amber and ancient bones, add a different layer, suggesting whole lineages that vanished before the modern world ever saw them, now walking again in bright battle arenas. The games do not linger on sadness. Battles continue, music loops, NPCs repeat their lines. However, these details add a quiet, emotional depth, a sense that the world could be harmed, but also healed if treated with care. Thinking about Lapra slowly returning, about rare Dratini surfacing in calm water, can be oddly comforting before sleep, because it suggests that patience, attention, and small protective choices can change the fate of entire species. And in the next stretch of this journey, the focus can drift toward how players themselves are quietly written into that ongoing story. As players are written into that quiet story of habitats and recovery, another layer is always there in the background, almost unnoticed. The sound of safety itself, the tiny audio rituals that follow every step. For many, the calmest of these is the Pokémon Center healing jingle, a sound that has changed so little across decades that it almost feels outside of time. Like a lullaby, the games hum back to players each time their team returns from danger. Did you know the act of walking into a Pokémon Center becomes its own small ceremony, repeated game after game in nearly identical fashion, until the body almost remembers it on its own? You step through the door, the sliding sound effect seals the outside world away. You hand over your team with a soft confirmation chime, and then that short melody plays while the Pokeballs glow on the counter, announcing that everything damaged has been quietly restored. The screen may change, the art may evolve, but that same sequence of notes sits at the core, and some claimed that just hearing it through headphones at night could calm them down after a long day. Around it, the user interface forms a second, softer rhythm, a pattern of clicks and beeps that, over time, become as familiar as any route. The sound of the menu opening, the gentle tick of a cursor, moving line by line, the tiny sparkle when an item is used. All of these repeat so often that they blur into a kind of metronome for exploration. One common rumor is that certain button presses during these menus might secretly change encounter rates or hidden values, but this was easily debunked, and what remains instead is something simpler: a predictable, mechanical heartbeat that reassures players that every selection has been heard. Then there are the route themes, especially the ones that never raise their voice. According to some, the most relaxing tracks in the series are not tied to legendaries or climactic moments at all, but to long, horizontal stretches of road and water. Hoenn's Route 119 in the rain, Sinnoh's Route 209 at night, Unova's Village Bridge with its distant vocals, or the gentle flow of Hoenn's water routes. These are pieces many players leave looping while the character stands still, turning the game into a kind of improvised music player. A quiet pattern interrupt appears here, because outside the games, those sounds escape into other routines as well. Many students and night shift workers said they load playlists of route themes, Pokémon Center music, and Softtown tracks as background noise for studying or sleep, carefully skipping battle themes and intense boss music, so nothing jolts them awake. Although the rumors are false that certain tracks can scientifically guarantee better dreams, there is a real comfort in choosing a single favorite tune and letting it repeat until it fades into the edge of awareness. As this section drifts to a close, players can let a favorite calming track surface in memory, maybe a nighttime route, a snowfield theme, or just that healing jingle, and allow it to play silently in the back of the mind while the next set of facts slowly approaches, step by step, like walking toward another distant town, light on the map. As that favorite track lingers at the edge of awareness, the story behind those gentle notes starts to come into focus. Because every calm melody in Pokémon was shaped by real composers working with quiet intent in the background. One of the most important names is Junichi Masuda, the original sound director, who helped decide not just what the Pokémon world would look like, but what it would sound like when players closed their eyes and thought of a town, a cave, or a peaceful route at night. Did you know the earliest games on the Game Boy were built under strict hardware limits, with only a few channels of sound available at once, so every melody had to earn its place? This meant composers like Masuda created short looping tunes that used simple, memorable phrases, carefully avoiding anything too harsh, because players might hear the same route or town theme for hours. The result was music that many could hum decades later, even if it was only a handful of notes stepping up and down in a gentle pattern, almost like a lullaby hiding inside an adventure. Those limitations also encouraged a kind of minimalism that helped the calmer tracks feel strangely intimate, as if the tiny speaker in the Game Boy was whispering rather than shouting. According to some early interviews, the composers paid close attention to repetition, making sure the lines would not become irritating, which is why so many Pokémon Center themes and small-town melodies feel endlessly familiar without quite wearing out their welcome. Some claimed that this simplicity made the music sound unfinished. However, this was easily debunked by later arrangements that revealed how deliberate those choices really were. As the series moved into newer hardware, the sound palette expanded, and the calmer side of the soundtrack grew richer, with gentle orchestration, soft strings, and airy synth pads flowing under the journeys. Nighttime routes in regions like Sinnoh and Unova added distant chimes, quiet piano, and subtle ambient noises, as if the game wanted players to slow their pace and just listen for a while. Region-specific instruments like flutes, shamisen-like plucks, or panpipes were woven into town themes to give each place a distinct atmosphere, turning certain villages into safe, sleepy spaces that felt almost like real hometowns. Many tracks were also written to loop so seamlessly that players could stand still in one spot and hardly notice where the song ended and began again. This was especially true for Pokémon centers, soft city themes, and some nighttime routes, where the loop point hides inside a held note or a repeated phrase, allowing the music to circle endlessly without drawing attention. One common rumor is that these loops were based on secret mathematical patterns to calm the mind, though no evidence supports that, and the truth is quieter: careful composition and a focus on comfort. Although the rumors are false, the idea that hidden decisions shape the way players feel is very real, and just as the music evolved, the visual side of Pokémon changed with it. Early concept art, alternate designs, and even scrapped creatures sat in studio drawers, some only glimpsed in art books or brief interviews. And over time, players began to whisper about unused Pokémon that almost made it into the games. Another rumor said that certain strange silhouettes and beta screenshots hinted at whole lines that vanished before release. And as the next section approaches, the focus slowly shifts from the sounds that soothe the journey to the unseen designs that sparked quiet speculation in the dark corners of the fandom. As those whispers about unseen silhouettes and vanished lines fade out, the focus shifts to the Pokémon that did make it from sketch to screen, carrying with them quiet traces of all the drafts and doodles that came before, like ghosts of pencils erased from the page. Did you know that for many fan-favorite partners, their journey began as rough shapes on copy paper, passed around offices, critiqued, redrawn, and slowly softened until they felt like creatures players would want to curl up beside, rather than just send into battle? Pikachu is the clearest example, and its story almost feels like a bedtime tale about design itself, because early concept art shows a much chubbier body shorter limbs, and an even rounder face. A kind of electric mochi that artists gradually slimmed down, while still keeping the cheeks and simple eyes that made it comforting to look at. According to some interviews, designers tested how Pikachu would sit on a shoulder or peek out from behind a tree long before worrying about competitive movesets, and that quiet focus on how it would simply exist on screen helped it become the mascot that followed players into every region. From there, many gentle Pokémon followed a similar path, with Clefairy, Eevee, and Togepi all emphasizing round silhouettes, tiny hands, and soft curves that almost invite the idea of sleep. Some claimed Clefairy was once considered a more central mascot, and its design reflects that, with a simple, plush-like outline that could be drawn easily by children copying from the screen. Eevee's concept sketches leaned into an intentionally ambiguous fox-dog-rabbit mix, but the key was always that fluffy collar and big eyes, elements that would look just as natural. Napping in a sunbeam as standing in a battle menu. Togepi, meanwhile, is almost a study in how to make a Pokémon feel safe. Its body tucked inside a patterned shell like a blanket, with tiny spikes that look more decorative than dangerous. And animators were said to think carefully about how it would wobble when it walked, or how it might rock gently when dozing in a trainer's arms. Designers often imagine how a Pokémon sleeps, eats, or reacts to rain, and this quiet, behavioral thinking is what makes even still images feel alive to players, as if the creature has a whole off-screen life. Some of the most intriguing details come from scrapped or altered designs that surfaced later in art books, where unfamiliar baby forms, alternate evolutions, or stranger takes on familiar faces appeared in faded sketches. One common rumor is that certain unused baby Pokémon were secretly hidden in the game code, accessible only through impossible events. However, this was easily debunked once data miners mapped out the cartridges and confirmed that these designs never left the paper stage. Although the rumors are false, they highlight how attached players became to the idea that any sketch could still be lurking somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Over time, fans themselves began to shape which designs stuck around in marketing, merchandise, and even future evolutions, new as popular choices like Eevee inspired entire branching lines, while myths about prototype forms encouraged artists to imagine what else could have existed. Another rumor said that feedback on cute round shapes in early generations pushed the series toward even softer companion Pokémon in later games. And while this rumor likely stems from a mix of interviews and fan speculation, it reflects a real pattern where reactions, fan art, and even hoaxes quietly loop back into the creative process, setting the stage for the next section's look at how that feedback turned into full-blown myths and fake leaks about Pokémon that never were. As that feedback loop between fans and creators settled into place, players were not just shaping designs and rumors, they were also quietly shaping how the world of Pokémon felt, especially through the anime, which many experienced in the late evening, when the opening theme and familiar voices became part of a daily wind-down ritual. Did you know for many, the sound of that soft intro, followed by the simple "Who's that Pokémon" silhouette, felt almost like a cue that homework was over and the calm part of the night had begun. Watching those episodes in order, players would notice a pattern where the show often stepped away from gyms and tournaments and instead focused on a single Pokémon in need, turning the story into something closer to a bedtime tale than an action series. Some episodes revolved around caring for an injured Pokémon that could barely move, with the group staying up through the night, taking turns feeding it berries and keeping a small fire going just to provide warmth. And the tension was not about a battle, but about whether gentle care would be enough. Other times, the plot was about reuniting a Pokémon with its family, walking slowly through forests or along river banks as the sun set, until a distant cry answered and the music shifted into something soft and almost lullaby-like. Certain images repeat so often that they almost feel like shared memories rather than individual scenes. Ash and Pikachu resting under a tree after a long day, with the camera pulling back to show clouds drifting overhead, became a visual shorthand for peace in that world. And players who grew up with the show can probably still picture the way Pikachu's ears drooped as it dozed off. Campfire scenes, with Brock quietly cooking and handing out food while sparks rose into the night sky, created a sense that the journey was not just about badges, but about having somewhere warm to sit when the road was dark. Rainy day episodes, where the group took shelter in a cabin, cave, or abandoned building, often slowed the pacing even more, letting the sound of rain on the roof or against stone fill long stretches of screen time while characters talked in hushed voices. Another rumor said that these slower episodes were just filler, and some claimed they could be skipped without missing anything important. However, this was easily debunked by how many players remember those quiet nights more clearly than certain major battles. Between gym challenges and league arcs, the anime would deliberately slow down, giving viewers time to simply exist in the world alongside the characters, watching them wash clothes in a river, repair a backpack strap, or share a story from a town they had already left behind. According to some, thinking back on these moments as adults can be as calming as watching them again, because the details act like a kind of mental background music, soft enough to fade behind whatever thoughts are drifting by as sleep approaches. Although the rumors are false that there is any hidden code or secret message in these scenes, the effect they have is very real, and players can use it intentionally. By remembering the color of the evening sky in a favorite episode, or the way the Pokémon Center lights glowed in the distance as rain finally stopped, those memories turn into a soft mental blanket, setting the stage for the next part of this journey, where the focus shifts back from animation cells to the quieter corners of the games themselves and the myths that tried to explain them. From those glowing windows in the distance, the anime often invites players inside, and once the scene shifts indoors, there are tiny details that quietly repeat until they start to feel like a ritual. In almost every region, the design of the Pokémon Center changes just enough to feel new, yet the core layout stays familiar, with the rounded counter, the soft red accents, and the warm, diffuse lighting that never seems harsh or clinical, more like a late-night cafe than a hospital. Nurse Joy's movements are smooth and unhurried, and Chansey's little waddling steps add a gentle rhythm in the background, as if the show is quietly saying that nothing truly bad can happen while that pink silhouette is moving around the room. Did you know that in many episodes, the interior lighting is slightly dimmer in the corners of the frame, so the brightest point is almost always the healing machine or the table where the group is resting? This draws the eye towards safety, and even when the plot is tense, the backgrounds keep suggesting calm. Some claimed that this was done only to save animation effort, but according to some staff interviews, the intention was to make indoor scenes feel like a refuge from the road, with shadows that never become threatening, just soft edges around the characters. Food scenes follow the same pattern, and the animators treat even simple camp meals with an almost reverent care. Rice glows with a faint, warm sheen. Bean steam curls upward in slow, looping motions, and curry or stew often has those thick, rounded highlights that make it look heavy and comforting, not flashy. Many players remember whole episodes just by the image of a pot bubbling over a small fire, or a close-up of a plate sliding onto a wooden table. The sound muted under gentle background music, so that the visual warmth does most of the work. In the edges of those frames, background Pokémon quietly go about their lives. A group of Pidgey might hop along a fence behind the main cast, or a Poliwag might be seen in more than one lakeside episode, swimming the same lazy circles as if it has its own routine that continues whether the story notices it or not. One common rumor is that some of these background Pokémon are deliberate reappearances of the exact same individuals, following the characters between towns, though this is probably false and more a reflection of how familiar designs start to feel like neighbors. Underneath it all, the music in non-battle scenes tends to reuse gentle motifs, especially in Pokémon centers and quiet streets at night, so that a few notes can instantly signal rest. Another rumor said that these tracks were secretly slowed-down versions of older game themes. And while this was never confirmed, the sense of continuity is strong enough that players might accept it without question. This rumor likely stems from how the games themselves hide similar small comforts, from the way NPCs turn to look at passing Pokémon, to tiny idle animations like a tail swish or flickering street lamps in late-night routes. Details that many only notice during slower, sleepless playthroughs. Which leads into the next part of this journey, where those background habits in the games and the myths that formed around them take center stage instead of staying at the edge of the frame. Those background habits and tiny animations almost feel like hints, as if the games are quietly inviting players to slow down, and in that slower pace, it becomes easier to imagine a different kind of journey. One where instead of sprinting between gyms, you are sitting on a slow, overnight train that glides through every region of the Pokémon world while the rest of the map sleeps. The car is dim, the rhythm of the tracks is steady, and outside the window, the screen of the world is scrolling by, one familiar place at a time. First comes Kanto, and did you know many players still think of the gentle hum of Vermilion City's port and lighthouse as the sound of classic, nighttime Pokémon? In this train version of the region, the SS, Anne is long gone. The harbor lamps are dots of orange in the distance, and the silhouettes of Wingull and the occasional Lapras drift across the dark water, while the red roof of a Pokémon Center glows like a tiny checkpoint of safety that never closes. The train slides into Johto before the thought has even finished, passing near Ecruteak City, where the old towers sit like sleeping guardians and the burned tower is just a darker shape against the sky. Its myths about Ho-Oh and the legendary beasts feeling quieter and older at this hour. Some claimed that visiting the Ilex Forest Shrine at night would change the music or summon Celebi without events. And although the rumors are false, the idea of a forest that only reveals its secrets after midnight still lingers in the way players remember that route theme. Hoenn appears as a coastline first, with the lights of Slateport fading and the sea around Moss Deep City turning into a flat sheet of reflected stars. According to some, standing by the Space Center's launch pad at night made it easier to imagine boarding a rocket to reach Deoxys, and this rumor likely stems from how isolated and dreamlike that town already feels. Then Sinnoh's snowfields replace the water, and the train briefly parallels the route near Snowpoint City, where Abomasnow shapes and Snover outlines move between the trees, while Lake Acuity is just a quiet mirror in the distance. Unova's skyline interrupts the calm for a moment, like a pattern break, with the bridge lights of Castelia and the Ferris wheel of Nimbasa forming a moving constellation of neon. Yet even there, the Pokémon Center signs and mart counters look exactly like they did in older regions, a reminder that these constants follow players everywhere. Kalos softens things again around Coumarine and the distant Prism Tower. Alola's islands flicker by, as scattered halos of beach fires and hotel windows, and Galar's wild area lamps give way to Paldea's rolling hills, where Mabosstiff-sized shapes and flocks of flying Pokemon cross the moon. Through all of it, the train keeps moving, and each region feels like another piece of scenery that could be watched closely or simply allowed to pass. The way facts and rumors in this story can drift in and out of attention while players grow sleepier, until the next stop arrives and a different kind of legend steps into view. As that imagined train glides onward, the lights outside the window begin to cluster and rise until the horizon turns into glass and steel, and players find themselves drifting above Unova, looking down on Castelia City as it settles into night. The water around the harbor is almost black, but the reflections of billboards, office towers, and moving taxis turn it into a shifting mosaic of color that looks strangely calm when watched from far away. Down at street level, Castelia's canyons of skyscrapers feel dense and towering, yet the late hour softens everything. Office windows go dark one by one. Neon signs hum. Sin in the streets empty just enough that footsteps echo between the buildings. Did you know that in Unova's night skybox, the deep blue gradually thickens and the stars sharpen? So if players linger long enough, they can almost chart time by the faint changes above those rooftops. Streetlights flicker on in sequence, casting little pools of yellow around benches and crosswalks, and the city feels less like a maze and more like a living, breathing backdrop. When players walk away from the main avenue and toward the piers, the soundscape changes. The traffic noise fades, replaced by the gentle slap of waves and the soft, looping percussion of Castelia's nighttime music, which blends urban rhythm with a surprisingly soothing melody. Small details hide in those quieter corners. NPCs, who only appear after dark, leaning on railings or staring out at the water, as if they have stories that can only be told when the city finally lowers its voice. One common rumor is that if players talk to every nighttime NPC on each pier in a single circuit, a secret event would trigger at midnight. However, this was easily debunked, leaving only the cozy ritual of the walk itself. According to some, Unova's entire layout feels like a rumor about New York retold through Pokemon, with Castelia standing in for Manhattan, Sky Arrow Bridge echoing those long suspension spans, and the outer routes acting like the quieter edges of the state. Yet the region always balances that crowded energy with peaceful outskirts. Places like Nuvema Town, with its wooden decks and soft surf, feel almost impossibly far from Castelia's glass towers, as even though they share the same skybox and the same slow transition from evening to night. The parks and small plazas within the cities echo this contrast too, turning into little islands of quiet where the music softens and the ambient sounds thin out. Some claimed that certain Unova tracks at night could influence encounter luck, especially the more urban themes with gentle drums and light synths, as if the game were hiding a rhythm-based secret in the background audio, though this was false and the songs remain what they actually are: carefully tuned soundscapes designed to make long walks feel hypnotic and safe. This rumor likely stems from players noticing how the tempo of their own exploration seemed to match the music, as if the city were walking alongside them. As the series moved forward into regions like Kalos and Alola, this experiment with atmosphere and lighting only deepened, and another rumor said that the developers had begun hiding entire mood-based events that only made sense if players paid attention to the sky and the way shadows shifted at night. Whether or not that part is true, the next stops on this late-night journey would push those quiet, cozy evenings even further, and one specific coastal town in a later region would turn the idea of a calm Pokemon night into something almost mythic. From those quiet, mood-based events, players eventually reached Kalos, a region that almost felt like a rumor about what Pokémon could be if it slowed down and focused on beauty instead of pressure. A place of plazas, cafes, and long scenic routes where the world seemed designed for wandering rather than rushing. Lumiose City, with its bright central tower and spinning taxicabs, was presented as a bustling hub. Yet did you know at just a few streets away, the noise faded into soft music, narrow alleys, and calm little corners that felt hidden in plain sight? In these side streets, an in-game cafe could feel more like a secret than a building on the map, with small tables, warm lighting, and gentle background tracks that looped just slowly enough to blend into the hum of conversation. Players could sit across from NPCs who said simple, almost sleepy lines about their day, while Pokémon rested at their feet or hovered nearby. And according to some, just staying there and listening made the rest of the game feel less like a challenge and more like a late-night visit to a familiar neighborhood. Nothing dramatic happened. No rare encounter suddenly appeared. Yet the act of doing nothing in a Pokémon game became its own kind of comfort. Outside the city, Kalos used its roots to lean into that same feeling. With long paths lined by autumn leaves, soft orange trees, and drifting petals that fell in slow, looping animations that many said felt more like a memory than a level. One common rumor is that certain routes with gentle rivers and distant waterfalls were coated with slightly different ambience values to make them more relaxing, though this was never confirmed and likely just came from players projecting their own calm onto the sound design. Still, walking along those banks, hearing the water and the subdued root themes, it felt believable that the game itself wanted players to pause, watch the reflections, and let battles become a background detail instead of the main event. Kalos also introduced something that changed how many players related to that world on a quieter, more personal level: character customization. Boutiques in cities and towns let players try on hats, coats, dresses, and shoes, and some claimed that finding the right outfit made the entire journey feel different, as if the trainer on screen finally matched the person holding the system. This rumor likely stems from how unusual it felt, after so many generations of fixed protagonists, to choose colors and styles, to see a hat tilt in the cafe light, or a coat sway on a breezy route, and to feel, in a subtle way, more at home. Although the rumors are false that Kalos secretly tracks how often players visit cafes or sit still on a bench, the region does feel like a gentle rehearsal for something else, a test run for a Pokémon world built around relaxation and familiarity. The next stop on this journey, a sunlit region of islands and ocean, would take that idea further, slowing the traditional gym structure into laid-back trials that felt less like exams and more like extended evenings by the shore. In Alola, that idea of rehearsal becomes the whole performance, and the region settles into an endless evening where everything feels like it is slowing down just for players. The sky turns from bright orange to deep violet over the ocean. Palm trees sway in a steady rhythm, and the last light of the sun catches on the waves in thin, glittering lines that pulse in and out like a calm, breathing pattern. By the time the in-game clock slips into night, the towns and routes feel different, with tiki torches flickering along sandy paths, casting long shadows that move when NPCs walk past, or when a Wingull glides overhead. Did you know the gentle sound design of Alola's shorelines, that soft wash of waves and distant cries of Pokémon, was often mentioned by players as something they would leave running in the background, almost like white noise? It turns the usual loop of walking, battling, and menuing, into something that feels closer to pacing along a quiet beach after dark. Instead of the towering, formal gyms of earlier regions, Alola offers trials that feel more like taking part in local customs than challenging official institutions. And that change in structure subtly rewrites the usual rhythm of play. One common rumor is that the trials were originally planned as normal gyms and only rebranded late in development. But this rumor likely stems from early assumptions that every region had to follow the same pattern, and there is no evidence that the totem battles and island challenges were last-minute replacements. Moving through the trial sites at dusk, with torches burning in caves or soft lantern light in jungles, players are not just battling. They are being invited to witness how the region itself lives. Away from the main paths, there are calm pockets that feel almost hidden, like the secluded beaches where only a few NPCs stand quietly, or the meadows where Oricorio dance while the sky fades to a darker blue. The in-game home in Alola, with its low wooden furniture, open windows, and the sound of the ocean always just outside, feels especially lived in, as though the game expects players to imagine returning there between journeys, then setting down the Rotom decks and listening to the waves under a starry ceiling. Alola's regional variants turn familiar Pokémon into gentle surprises, as if even the creatures have adapted to the slower air. Some claimed that Alolan Vulpix, with its pale blue fur and ice typing, contradicted the region's warmth. However, this was easily debunked once players noticed its habitat in the cooler heights of Mount Lanakila, where the air thins and the world grows quieter. Alolan Raichu, floating on its tail like a surfboard, looks like a rumor made real, a comforting twist on an old friend that has learned to ride the psychic currents of this softer environment. Under the wide Alolan sky, filled with clear constellations and the distant silhouettes of flying Pokémon, the series quietly reminds players that it is not only about victory screens and experience bars. It is also about standing still on a pier at night, watching reflections of torchlight on the water, existing in a gentle, living world that continues whether or not another battle ever starts. A world that the next region would echo in its own, very different way. From that quiet pier, the path eventually bends toward Galar, a region that looks modern at a glance, yet keeps that same hushed feeling in its corners if players slow down long enough to notice. Did you know Galar is built as a long spine of industrial cities and misty countryside, where steel stadiums and coal-black trains sit only a short walk away from sheep-filled hills and sleepy farmhouses? Postwick, the very first town, is almost deliberately small, with only a handful of homes, a garden, and the distant hum of trains that never quite breaks the calm. As players move north, the contrast becomes stronger, but the cozy spaces stay. Motostoke's ironworks and turbines glow in the distance, yet the wild area right outside is open, grassy, and strangely peaceful at night, with dim den lights flickering like campfires and silhouettes of flying Pokémon crossing the moon. According to some, wandering the wild area in a storm, with only the bike's headlight and the quiet footsteps of a partner Pokémon, felt closer to a nature documentary than a battle game, a place where players could ignore the main story and simply walk until the music and rain blurred together. Then there is Balonlea, hidden in a glowing forest where the trees themselves seem to emit light. Giant mushrooms pulse in soft blues and pinks. The paths twist gently, and the town is so small that players can see almost every house at once. Yet it feels enclosed, like an indoor garden. One common rumor is that there were secret paths deeper into the forest that would reveal an older, darker version of Balonlea, though this was easily debunked once maps and data mines appeared, and the truth remained simpler. Just a tiny settlement, wrapped in bioluminescent fog. Galar's open areas would quietly set the stage for Paldea, where that sense of freedom expands into almost the entire map. Here, the school itself becomes the home base, a twist on older Pokémon centers and hometowns with dorm rooms, classes, and a timetable that players can follow or ignore at will. The Academy's hallways are bright but not harsh, filled with recurring NPCs, class lectures, and small side stories, turning the school into a steady routine that players can return to between long, meandering rides across the countryside. Some claimed the school setting meant the series had finally grown up and left its old myths behind. Yet the legends in both Galar and Paldea show the opposite. Dragons, knights, and legendary treasures still appear, but now they are framed by train platforms, city skylines, and classrooms, like old fairy tales retold with smartphones and dorm bunk beds in the background. Although the rumors are false that every new generation abandons the past, each region quietly reuses the same core image. A trainer, a single partner, Pokémon at their side, and a world that can be crossed slowly, at whatever pace feels right. A feeling that the next legends and the next supposed leaks would continue to echo in their own way. As players move forward through each new region, it can feel like the world is complete, every route and town placed exactly where it was meant to be. Yet behind that finished picture, there is a quieter layer, made of things that were almost there, but not quite. Did you know that in nearly every Pokémon game, the data still holds unused rooms, test maps, and half-finished ideas, sitting just out of reach unless someone glitches through a wall or pulls the cartridge apart with data mining tools? Developers need places to test battles, movement, and events. So buried in the code of older titles, players later found simple gray grids, empty houses, and strange little islands where nothing happens, all never meant to be seen. According to some, wandering into one of these spaces with a glitch feels like walking into a dream version of the game, where the colors are the same and the tiles are familiar. But the layout is wrong, doors lead nowhere, and music loops in ways that feel slightly off, like a memory that does not quite match how things really were. In one generation, unused houses sit in the data with doors that never open in normal play, their interiors fully mapped with tables, beds, and NPC positions, but no working way to enter them from the main world. In another, an early version of a city's layout still exists as a separate map, with streets too wide and Pokémon centers placed in odd corners, showing how the design once looked before it was rearranged into the final version that players know. Some claimed that these maps were evidence of secret post-game areas or hidden events, though they are usually just leftovers from development, the rough sketches behind the finished painting. There are also stray bits of unused text, describing items that never appear, or referencing events that never trigger, like tickets to unnamed locations or mysterious descriptions of key items without any matching quest. One common rumor is that these lines prove that certain Pokémon or legendaries were planned as secret encounters and then quietly removed. And while this rumor likely stems from fans connecting scattered clues, the truth is calmer and more ordinary, yet still strangely cozy to imagine. It is enough to picture that beyond each visible town border, there are half-built paths and silent rooms where the game's ideas once stretched a little farther than they finally did. Although the rumors are false that these places hide dangerous glitches or cursed data, the feeling of stepping backstage lingers whenever players see screenshots of a test map or an unused house. It suggests that, even in the most familiar region, there is always one more door that almost led somewhere, and one more path that nearly existed, raising a quiet question about what else. Just beyond those almost paths and unused doors, players began to build something the developers never fully controlled. Soft urban legends, passed along like ghost stories told in whispers after the Game Boy screen went dark, filling in every gap, the code left empty, and every strange detail that never quite received an official explanation. In that quiet space, rumor and reflection mix together until it can be hard to tell where the game ends and the campfire tale begins. Did you know one common rumor is that some regions take place after a great war, with certain gym leaders or Elite Four members said to be veterans or symbols of how a society rebuilds when the fighting has already ended off-screen? According to some, the lack of adults in early towns, the presence of many officers and soldiers, and even the power plants and barren routes form a kind of hidden history lesson that the games never directly describe, even though no creator has ever confirmed this, and official materials treat the regions as peaceful. The theory lingers anyway, because it makes every city feel like it has a scar players cannot quite see. Another rumor said that certain important trainers are not just strong opponents, but quiet metaphors, with champions or rivals representing concepts such as grief, growing up, or even the player's own reflection, standing in for the choices that could have been made instead. Some claim that a silent protagonist facing a talkative rival is a deliberate contrast between action and hesitation, or that a returning champion in a later game is a symbol of the past refusing to fade. Though, in developer interviews, these characters are usually described in simple terms like strong or cool, without any hidden philosophy attached. Although the rumors are false in a strict canon sense, they spread because they feel true in a different way, connecting scattered clues, bits of dialogue, and half-remembered Pokédex entries into a pattern that players can think about long after the credits roll. A single line about a nearly extinct Lapras or an eerie ghost-type description that reads like a tiny horror story can become the seed for a much larger personal mythology that grows quietly in the background of every later playthrough. Then, as a kind of pattern interrupt, there are theories that focus less on darkness and more on strange comfort, such as the idea that the Pokémon Center healing jingle is a kind of in-universe lullaby that every trainer knows by heart, or that Unown are fragments of language from an older world, still trying to speak through walls and ruins. This rumor likely stems from how often those shapes spell out hidden messages, inviting players to read meaning into every curve. In the end, part of the charm is that none of these ideas ever need a final answer, and the not knowing becomes its own gentle ritual, letting many interpretations drift side by side like different timelines. As players fall into familiar routines, always choosing the same starter, visiting certain routes at night, or pausing a moment in front of a favorite building, each person quietly creates a private set of Pokémon myths, small stories that shape how the series feels, and those personal legends will guide the next stretch of this journey just as strongly as any official lore. Those private legends tend to grow out of tiny habits, and over time, they start to feel as real as any official rumor or hidden event. Did you know many players treat each new save file almost like a quiet ritual, repeating the same choices so the adventure feels safe and familiar before anything unpredictable can happen? Some always pick the same starter, no matter how many generations pass, as if that one Pokémon is destined to walk beside them in every region, while others always name the rival after a real person, turning that early battle into a small inside joke that only they would understand. According to some longtime players, even the act of saving in front of important buildings, like gyms, the Pokémon League, or a Legendary's chamber, becomes a kind of unspoken rule, a way of pausing at the doorway before stepping into something that might change the whole story. The glowing save icon, the soft chime, and the brief stillness between footsteps all become part of that repeated pattern. Over multiple games, these patterns extend to entire teams, and many claimed that carrying the same species forward feels less like strategy and more like keeping a promise. A Gengar that appears in every file, a Lapra always named the same thing, or a starter line that returns in each new region can begin to feel like old friends who somehow remember previous journeys, even though this is technically false in the game's data. Though the code does not recall those memories, players fill in the gaps, and a familiar party composition turns each region map into a different version of the same shared dream. Then there are the smaller traditions that almost no one talks about. The ones that would sound strange if they were written down, yet feel completely natural in the moment. Some players check the TV in every house, just in case a broadcast changes, or a new line of text appears, while others speak to every NPC in a town before moving on, as if missing one sentence would disturb the balance of the playthrough. Another rumor said that visiting a certain location only at night, a lighthouse, a quiet route, or the edge of a lake, could change the feeling of the story in ways that could not be measured, and this rumor likely stems from how different the same place can seem under darker palettes and gentler music. Over time, these patterns turn the games into something more than stories. They become personal spaces, almost like small apartments made of pixels and sound, where the furniture is just a set of routines that always sit in the same place. One common rumor is that only rare glitches or secret events matter. However, this was easily debunked by how strongly players react when a favorite tradition is broken or removed. For now, it may help to quietly notice one small Pokemon ritual that feels calming. A name, a route, a building, or a team member, and allow that memory to sit beside the next myths and hoaxes as the journey moves deeper into the stranger corners of the series' history. That small ritual can stay in the background for now, as players shift from memories on a screen to something quieter, almost like stepping into the room of the game itself and letting one gentle Pokemon sit beside them in the dark. For a moment, the myths and rumors can fade out, and the series turns into something softer and closer, a kind of personal guardian drifting at the edge of sleep. Now imagine choosing a single partner to rest nearby, not battling, not leveling, just existing with players in the same calm space. It might be Eevee, curled into a loose circle at the foot of the bed, its fur rising and falling with each slow breath, the faintest rustle of its tail sounding like grass in a light wind. It could be Togepi, the way the anime showed it dozing in Misty's arms, tiny shell rocking slightly with each drowsy movement, set in some Pokédex entries to store gentle happiness that it shares with anyone it trusts. Some claimed the most comforting choice would always be Snorlax, not as a roadblock this time, but as a quiet wall of warmth, its deep breathing forming a steady rhythm that players could match without thinking. In several games, Snorlax is described as sleeping most of the day, only waking to eat before drifting off again. And that slow, unhurried pattern turns into a kind of living white noise machine, a reminder that nothing urgent has to happen right now. Even Pikachu, often shown energetic and alert, has anime scenes where it naps against Ash's leg, ears drooping, sparks gone, just a small, even sound of air as it sleeps. Did you know many players carry one comfort Pokemon across generations when they can, transferring an old partner through cables, adapters, and online services, almost like a familiar ghost following them from cartridge to cartridge. Another rumor said that certain Pokemon like Lapras remember trainers even after long breaks. And while this is false in the code, it matches how players project memory and safety onto them. According to some, a favorite plush, figure, or card on a nightstand does a similar thing, turning a fictional creature into a quiet, watching presence that does not judge or demand anything. This is a place where the usual myths about hidden forms and secret evolutions do not matter, because the only detail that counts is how that chosen Pokemon rests. One common rumor is that ghost types are always frightening, yet many of their cries and animations are soft and almost playful, and this rumor likely stems from reading only the darkest Pokédex lines without noticing how gently they actually move in battle. As players breathe, that partner breathes, and the Pokemon world becomes less a set of challenges and more a landscape that can be visited in thought whenever reality feels too sharp. Soon the journey will return to stranger stories and elaborate hoaxes, but for now it is enough to know that this world can also be a bedroom, a quiet route at night, or a silent Pokemon Center bench, waiting whenever players need to unwind again. In that quiet version of the Pokemon world, even progress stops sounding like a challenge and starts to feel like something that just happens while players rest. And the clearest example of that is the daycare. In many games, you can simply leave two Pokemon with a kindly couple on the edge of a route, walk away, and let time and distance do the work as levels tick upward slowly, almost secretly, while the real focus becomes the sound of footsteps and the rhythm of crossing the same stretch of road again and again. Did you know some players would choose weaker or favorite partners to leave there on purpose, just to imagine them napping in a field somewhere, gaining experience without ever needing to feint another opponent? The mechanics are simple, but they encourage a different pace, where each lap around the nearby path is less about grinding and more about letting the world breathe, and where checking back in on the daycare feels like visiting old friends. According to some, this was the calmest way to train, because the Pokemon would gain strength while the player simply drifted through routes, listening to music, thinking about other things, and hardly looking at the screen except to see that gentle +1 level message appear. Side by side with that is the friendship or happiness system, which turns ordinary movement into a slow kind of promise, where every step taken with a partner in the party adds an invisible point to an invisible bond. Many players first noticed it with Pokemon like Eevee or Togepi, which would only evolve when their hidden friendship value was high enough. So walking, feeding berries, avoiding knockouts, and even using items like haircuts or massages in Johto would gradually raise an unseen meter. One common rumor is that spinning in place or circling a town endlessly would boost friendship faster than normal walking, and some claimed that holding certain buttons while moving could increase it further. However, this was easily debunked once the data was extracted and the exact values were known. Later features like Pokemon Amy in Kalos, or camping and curry in Galar, and picnics in Paldea made that invisible bond feel more tangible. Letting players pet Pokemon, feed them little pastries, wipe off sand and mud, or watch them nap near a tent. There is no timer counting down, no strict objective, only small animations and soft sound effects. So the act of calling a partner over, seeing it run across the grass, and giving it a treat becomes its own quiet reward, and the screen turns into something closer to an aquarium than a battlefield. Eggs continue that pattern, sitting in a party slot as a promise of something new, while the game counts steps in the background until the moment a message interrupts the walk and the hatching animation begins. Some players treat this like a meditation, choosing a long, straight route or a city loop, pacing back and forth while the music repeats, waiting for that gentle crack of the shell, and even when breeding for specific traits, the core loop stays strangely soothing. In the middle of the night, when battles feel too sharp and menus feel too bright, these mechanics invite a slower, more mindful way of playing, where the goal is not to win but to exist in the region for a while, and soon the story will return to sharper rumors and stranger hoaxes. But for now, the daycare lights, the campfire glow, and the soft sound of hatching eggs are enough. From that quiet rhythm of eggs hatching and curry simmering, players sometimes drift into another kind of slow project, one that barely feels like a goal at all until it has quietly taken over whole storage boxes. This is the idea of the living Pokédex, where instead of just registering every Pokémon in the dex, players keep one of every species, physically present and waiting in the PC, like a tiny museum that only opens when the cursor slides over each box. Did you know some claim this kind of collection started as a practical way to track version exclusives and trade evolutions? But over time, it turned into a gentler ritual, with players catching a spare Caterpie here, a forgotten Dunsparce there, until the empty spaces in the boxes began to feel like missing teeth. A living dex does not demand progress, it just sits in the background, and every time a new route is visited, or an old save is opened, another slot could quietly be filled, another ordinary Pokémon given a permanent home, instead of being released after a single battle. Alongside this, there are softer marks of completion that most players never fully see. Ribbons and marks and tiny icons that only appear if a Pokémon has traveled through contests, festivals, and years of different games. According to some, a ribboned Pokémon begins to feel haunted, not in a scary way, but in the sense that every little badge on its summary screen hints at a night of battle tower attempts, a beauty contest in Hoenn, or a long subway ride spent EV training in Unova. In later generations, marks from weather, time of day, or personality quietly attach themselves, so a Pokémon caught at dusk in the rain might carry that moment forever in a single line of text. These kinds of goals stretch far beyond one cartridge, because with transfer tools and remakes, a single partner could move from a chubby early Pikachu sprite all the way to a sleek modern model, collecting ribbons as if they were rings on a tree trunk. Some claimed that if a Pokémon survived every migration, every data conversion and hardware jump, it would become rarer than any event distribution, not because of stats, but because of the unbroken chain of attention required to keep it alive across decades. There is no timer for this, however. No penalty if a box remains half-finished, or a ribbon list stays empty. Players can leave these projects untouched for months or years, then suddenly remember an old file and add one more piece to the puzzle. One common rumor is that only the most dedicated collectors attempt such things. But this rumor likely stems from how hidden these systems are, because in reality, many players are slowly building living dexes, or ribbon collections without even naming them, just by refusing to release a favorite, or by always saying yes when an in-game contest judge asks for one more performance. Although the rumors are false in a literal sense, there is a quiet truth underneath the idea that Pokémon carried forward like this. Remember where they have been. Since for players the sight of a certain OT name and date can pull back an entire time of life. A school year, a move to a new city, a late-night grind during exams. Over time, the collection in the PC becomes a collection of evenings, car rides, and specific songs that happen to be playing while a route was being explored. And the living dex starts to feel like a diary, written in sprites instead of words, which leads to a different kind of story about Pokémon, one that many magazines never printed and that early rumor sites never fully captured, and soon the script will return to stranger hoaxes and manufactured myths. But first, there is one more quiet way. The games have followed players into the rest of their lives that sounds almost like a rumor on its own. It almost sounds like a rumor to say that plastic cartridges can hold memories that are not programmed into them. Yet many players quietly treat them that way, as if each generation of Pokémon is fused to a particular phase of their lives and cannot be separated from it. For some, Red and Blue are not just Kanto, but the final years of primary school, the bus rides where the screen was hard to see in the sunlight, and the first time someone said they had heard of a hidden poke god on the playground. According to some, gold and silver do not simply represent Johto. They represent a first move to a new town, a different school, or a new group of friends passing one Game Boy Color around at lunch. The translucent shell glowing faintly under cafeteria lights. The carts themselves start to tell a story over time, the label a little peeled at the corner, the plastic slightly cloudy from being pulled in and out of a backpack, and the handhelds bearing the same scuffs, as if the journeys through these pixel regions left marks in the real world as well. Did you know way those old cartridges click into place can act like a kind of time machine? A small sound that brings back an entire year of life in a single second. Many players could pick up a battered DS with a chipped hinge and remember late-night diamond and pearl sessions under blankets, the soft blue glow mixing with the sound of the healing jingle that, across decades, barely changed at all. That tiny loop from every Pokémon Center becomes a comfort sound that links wildly different eras together, from childhood to adulthood, from CRTs to flat screens. One common rumor is that if players stop following a series for a few years, the magic will be gone when they return. However, this was easily debunked by the quiet experience of starting a later generation after a long break and feeling something almost like visiting an old hometown. The buildings look different. The routes are laid out in new ways, and there are Pokémon that never existed in the old mental map, though the feeling of setting out from a small starting town remains strangely unchanged. Some claimed this would be disorienting, but for many it turns into a calm kind of déjà vu instead. Each region becomes a place in the mind that can be walked through without even turning on a system, just by remembering one route theme or cave echo. A single bar from a Johto night track can bring back bike rides home from evening clubs, while a Hoenn surf theme might recall a portable system carried along on a family trip. As this video continues, it can serve as a bridge between those older save files and the present moment, keeping quiet company while players drift off. And soon the script will return to stranger hoaxes and sharper myths. But for now, the cartridges resting on shelves and in drawers are enough to prove that even false rumors fade slower than real memories. Memories like that tend to linger at the edges of thought, and as players grow more tired, those edges start to blur into something softer, almost like the way a route theme fades into a town's music when the screen changes. So as the video settles in the middle of these stories, it can also offer quieter questions, small prompts that do not need answers, only a bit of space in the back of the mind while sleep approaches. Did you know many players have a favorite nighttime track without ever really deciding on it? A song the brain drifts to when the room is dark and the glow of a handheld is gone? Some claimed that the most relaxing music comes from Johto's gentle roots with the low, looping melodies around Ecruteak City, while others would quietly hum the Laufey-like calm of Sinnoh's Canalave City or the slow, distant feeling of Unova's village bridge. According to some, the soft waves in Hoenn's Slateport at night could almost be heard even when the console was off, as if the memory of that sound kept playing on its own. As players lie there, They could let one region's night theme start playing in their thoughts as though the speakers are somewhere just out of sight. Another rumor said that if a single Pokemon was imagined resting nearby, it would feel easier to sleep, though this was easily debunked as anything more than a comforting idea. Still, the image can be gentle. Perhaps a drowsy Mareep curled at the foot of an invisible bed, its wool dimly glowing like a muted status light, or a Chansey from a quiet Pokemon Center sitting in a corner chair, watching over the room with the same patience shown to fainted teams. Some might picture a Lapra, even indoors, as if the mattress is a calm ocean, and the ride Pokemon is just beneath, keeping everything afloat. There is no right choice, or the mind can let one shape appear, and then change it without consequence. From there, a perfect in-universe evening can unfold almost automatically. Players could imagine stepping out of a small inn in Cherry Grove City, the sky already dark, the street lamps casting that familiar soft circle of light seen in so many towns. A slow walk along Route 119's raised walkways, or through the quiet of Kalus's Route 7 as crickets chirp just off-screen, could lead to a hill where the stars are brighter than the battle screen ever shows. The Pokeballs on a belt do not open. They only sit there, silent, while constellations drift like unused menu icons. One common rumor is that imagining a base or hidden room in the Pokemon world could trap dreams there. This rumor likely stems from how often players return to secret bases in Hoenn or the underground in Sinnoh, decorating them over and over. In this moment, that idea can be used differently, as a safe space rather than a trap. Perhaps a tiny secret base carved into a mossy wall on Route 120, lit by a single lantern and a familiar poster, or a top-floor apartment in Lumiose City with shelves of cartridges and plushes that never fell off. The details can be as sharp or as vague as tiredness demands. A bed in the corner, a PC that never glitches, a window that always shows stars instead of the clock. Although the rumors are false about thoughts affecting games, they can still drift through like background NPCs, present but harmless. There is no correct region, no canon partner, no officially endorsed room layout, only whatever feels safest in the moment. As the video later returns to stranger hoaxes and sharper myths, these quiet images can stay behind, folded into dreams, so that even the most unsettling stories remain framed by a world where the healing jingle still plays, the night themes still loop, and the screen can fade to black whenever players finally close their eyes. From that imagined safe room, players can let their thoughts drift a little farther, toward places that do not exist yet, but still feel strangely familiar, as if they were half-remembered regions from a dream. Did you know many fans already sketch out entire maps in their heads, so it almost feels natural to picture the series quietly unfolding into new landscapes designed more for wandering than for winning. Some picture a future region based on a sleepy coastal country, where most towns are only a few streets wide, and the loudest sound at night is the distant call of Wingull over a dark harbor. Lantern-lit piers could hold tiny night markets, with vendors selling slow-cooked curry ingredients and handmade Pokédoll charms, while Chinchou and Lantern glow beneath the water like moving streetlights. Another rumor said that a snowy region would someday focus almost entirely on winter, with narrow paths between deep drifts, frozen lakes reflecting the sky, and small wooden villages where smoke rises from chimneys as Delibird and Alolan Vulpix leave tracks outside. According to some, future games could lean even more into comfort, turning the temporary camp into something closer to a traveling home. Expanded camps might remember where players last placed every kettle, cushion and toy, so returning after a long walk would feel like coming back to a familiar living room in the middle of the wild. Customizable houses in quiet towns could go further, letting players choose soft music, dim lamps, and shelves full of decorations from past journeys, so each save file would hold a private museum of gentle memories. One common rumor is that a later title will finally remove almost all pressure, letting players roam a nearly objective-free open world, where the map is huge but the stakes stay small. Fields could stretch on for minutes at a time with nothing urgent to do, only Sudowoodo lined along a road, or a distant train crossing a bridge while the camera lingers. There might be side quests that are closer to slice-of-life episodes than challenges, like helping a tired shopkeeper close early, or walking a lost Esper back through quiet streets as the city lights slowly turn on. Some claimed that if the series changed too much, it would stop feeling like Pokémon. However, this was easily debunked by how each generation still returns to the same simple image: a trainer on a path and a partner at their side. Even if future regions become wider, or homes become cozier, that basic rhythm of walking, resting, and listening to the healing jingle remains. So players who use these games to fall asleep now can imagine doing the same years from today, dozing off to new night themes in regions not yet announced, while the next set of rumors waits in the dark, ready to be whispered, misread, and carefully untangled in the sections still to come. As that healing jingle fades in your memory, some players can imagine the screen shifting back to the Pokédex, its quiet beeping replacing the sound of footsteps, its ordered list turning into a kind of lullaby, number after number, sliding past in a slow, predictable rhythm. The cursor moves down, the numbers climb up, and nothing urgent happens. The only thing that changes is a single line of text, a calm little fact about a familiar Pokémon. Did you know that starting from the very beginning, with Bulbasaur, the Pokédex always greets players with the same structure, the same name, the same number, and then a short description that could almost be a bedtime sentence? It is said that Bulbasaur stores gentle energy in the bulb on its back, and that simple phrase sits there in the same font as every other entry, reassuring in how plain it looks. Then the list scrolls, the sound clicks, and Ivysaur appears, then Venusaur, the pattern already locked in place. Farther down, Pikachu's entry reminds players that this Pokémon stores electricity in its cheeks, a tiny design detail that has been repeated so many times across games, shows, and merchandise that it becomes background noise. Just below, Clefairy is described as dancing under the moonlight in quiet mountains, and according to some early in-game texts, its gatherings are almost never seen by humans, which makes the idea feel like a soft rumor the world inside the cartridge whispers to itself. Jumping ahead through generations, the same layout greets something like Togepi, said to share its happiness with those who care for it, or Lapras, once described as nearly extinct, before later entries calmly mention that its numbers have recovered. And some claimed that this change meant players had saved the species, though this was never directly confirmed. Instead, the Pokédex just keeps listing facts in that same neutral tone, as if the world is healing off-screen. Another rumor said that certain ghost-type entries were too frightening, but when players actually read them in-game, many are written like short stories that end up feeling strangely gentle when read slowly, line by line. As the numbers tick up into Unova, Kalos, and beyond, the Unknown appear again as shapes like letters, their entries repeating that they may be trying to communicate. This rumor likely stems from the way they spell hidden messages on walls and ruins. Entry after entry uses phrases like "this Pokémon" and "it is said that." the wording looping so often that it blurs into a steady murmur. At this point, players do not need to remember each detail. Each fact can just drift past like distant traffic or rain on a window. So the Pokédex keeps scrolling, but more slowly now, as if the cursor itself is getting tired, pausing on each number a little longer before moving on. Even when the stream of facts begins to thin out in the next sections, that calm feeling of ordered entries and gentle claims can linger, letting the rest of the story settle into a quieter, dreamlike pace. So, as that tired cursor slows down, players can let the whole screen gently dissolve into something even softer, as if the Pokédex closes itself and the world around it fades into the warm light of a Pokémon Center at night. The bright white of the interface gives way to that familiar soft red and cream glow, the kind that always said the journey could pause here, and nothing bad would follow players through the sliding doors. The healing jingle plays one more time, clear and bright for just a moment. Then it trails off and settles into the background, almost like it is looping from a distant room behind the counter. Did you know many players describe that sound as one of the most comforting pieces of game audio they have ever heard, because it always meant every Pokémon on the team would be restored, no matter how close to fainting they had been a few seconds before. Now it just hums quietly under everything else, a kind of audio nightlight. In this calmer light, the whole journey that came before can be seen at once, not as a list of rumors, but as a slow walk through regions. Kanto came first, with its early myths and that heavy nostalgia. All those tiny Game Boy towns where some claimed that hidden HMs or unreachable gardens might be waiting just off-screen. Then Johto drifted in with its older myths and shrine stories, towers and bells and legends that always sounded like they had been told for centuries, even though they were written for a cartridge that fit in a pocket. Hoenn followed with warm seas and long routes over the water, the kind of place where another rumor said that rockets, islands, or distant flashes in the sky could hide secret Pokémon if players just searched long enough. After that, Sinnoh's colder air and clear nights brought talk of space, time, and stars. And according to some, there were still things beyond the top of Mount Coronet that the games never fully showed. Even the newer regions, with their trains, schools, and cafes, these offered quieter corners, side rooms, and back streets where small stories and cozy details could sit unnoticed for years. Along the way, the facts themselves moved between different shapes, from calm biology about how certain Pokémon behave at night or where they like to sleep to softer lore about ruins, legends, and half-remembered history, then into development trivia and little behind-the-scenes choices that explained why certain designs or sounds ended up the way they did. There were also those more personal rituals players invented, the habits and button presses, and bedtime routes that never truly changed the code. However, this was easily debunked. Although the rumors are false, they still shaped how many experienced each region. If attention drifted in and out somewhere in there, that is completely fine. This kind of story was meant to sit beside players like a quiet companion, not demand that every sentence be held on to. The important parts still reach the room. The feeling of safe places, the rhythm of claims and gentle corrections, the sense that the world of Pokémon keeps existing calmly, whether anyone is watching it or not. As the energy lowers even more, sentences stretch out, pauses grow longer, and the image of that Pokémon Center bed, with the team fully healed and the lights dimmed, can stay in place while the final pieces of this journey settle, almost ready to sleep entirely. So if that image of the dim Pokémon Center has stayed in your mind and you are somehow still awake, This is a quiet moment, just for the players who decided to stay in the world of Pokemon a little longer, letting these stories drift past like text boxes that no longer need to be read, only felt. It is a small thing, but this time spent together, in that calm rhythm of rumors and facts, is its own kind of gentle link cable, humming softly between your day and your sleep. Some listeners are probably already gone, breathing slowly somewhere past the point where the last rumor was debunked, and that is perfectly fine, because in a way the video has already done exactly what it needed to do, fading into the background, like the healing jingle that plays and then disappears, while your team is restored. Others might be hovering in between, eyes half closed, catching only fragments, like hearing the word lavender or Mew, and then losing the rest to the dark. If you are still following the words, did you know that this kind of slow, steady flow can become its own nightly route, a path players return to without even thinking about it? The same way the games quietly guide you back to the Pokemon Center after every long stretch of tall grass. There is no need to watch the screen, no need to focus on anything in particular. The sound alone can be enough, like walking through a region at night with the text speed turned down, just letting the dialogue advance on its own. Some claimed that certain tracks, like the Pokemon Center theme or the soft remix of the Pallet Town music, could almost work like in-universe lullabies. And although the rumors are false in a technical sense, that feeling of safety they create is real enough for many players trying to sleep. According to some, even the chime that plays when a Pokeball successfully clicks shut has become a comfort sound, a tiny signal that something uncertain has settled down. If any particular detail tonight felt relaxing, a memory of a favorite route theme, a quiet moment from the anime, or a small behavior from a Pokemon that stayed with you, those thoughts are welcome to surface whenever there is time, not as a task but as a slow suggestion, shaping where future nights might wander. One common rumor is that the Pokemon world is always busy with battles and tournaments. However, this was easily debunked by all the empty late-night routes, the still lakes, and the NPCs who never move from their favorite bench, waiting patiently whether anyone visits them or not. That same patience is there for tomorrow night and the night after, because the regions do not vanish when the game is off. They simply rest, like a save file waiting on the title screen, ready to open into another quiet escape whenever sleep needs a familiar place to go. So now, as that save file waits, players can let the rest of the screen grow darker in their minds, the colors of the last route or city slowly draining into a soft, familiar black, like the handheld's glow dimming in a quiet room after one final press of the power button. Before that imagined screen fades all the way, take one last slow breath, the kind that feels like drawing in the gentle hum of a Pokemon Center, and then letting it out as if the sound is drifting away, down a long, empty corridor of tiles and doorways, leaving only stillness behind. Breathing like this turns the usual rush of menus and battles into something distant and harmless. A game paused instead of a challenge waiting. Some claimed that if players never actually saved and only turned the console off, the world would somehow forget them, as if routes would reset and Pokemon would no longer remember the journey. However, this was easily debunked by the simple way the mind returns to the same places night after night, because the regions in memory behave more like stories than data, picking up exactly where the last thought left off, even after days or years away. All the regions, from Kanto's simple paths to Unova's bridges and Kalos's plazas, stay arranged in the same quiet order, and all the routes, caves, and side rooms visited in thought. Tonight will still be waiting whenever players return, just like a train that keeps its schedule regardless of who boards it. Or a hidden clearing where the same gentle Pokémon continue to appear in the tall grass. Did you know that although the rumors are false about secret new areas unlocking if players keep a game running while they sleep, the feeling of slipping back into an old file after a long time away often carries the same strange thrill, as if the NPCs and Pokémon noticed the absence and are quietly relieved that someone has come back to watch them move again, even if nothing in the code has changed at all. Whether the next minutes are for sleep or only for lying still a little longer, with eyes closed and thoughts drifting like slow surf across an empty sea route, this is a moment that does not need to be earned, because rest in this world functions more like a Pokémon Center than a rare item. Players do not have to prove anything to step inside. They only have to arrive. According to some, taking time like this is an indulgence that could be skipped. One common rumor is that only after enough effort or progress does quiet become deserved. But this rumor likely stems from the same place as so many in-game myths. A mix of half-heard advice and pressure that sounds convincing until it is gently examined and found to be false, like a missing no. Encounter that looks dangerous, but vanishes when the power is calmly turned off. So let the handheld in memory close with a soft click. Let the last music loop fade out into silence, and let the Pokémon world offer one more invisible save. Not in the game, but in the way the body settles. For now, there is nothing else required, only the slow dark of a screen at rest and a quiet good night from every region, waiting patiently until players choose to wake and return.